Welcome to This Late Hour, a look at the world through the lens of Scripture. I'm your host, Kasey Knowlton.
Well, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I hope you've been having an enjoyable summer so far and that it's been cool where you are. Where I'm at, I've definitely been seeing some really hot days. In fact, we had one 12-hour period of a rolling blackout, and we were very thankful here at our home to have a small generator to keep our freezer and refrigerator running. Today, we're going to be going back to I'm going to be going back to my discussion with Andrew Jones and moving on from the Durupinar site and talking about what I believe and what he is convinced of also, and many others in the Christian community, of talking about the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. There are some fascinating elements and bits of evidence that are still preserved there in the desert that are absolutely breathtaking. And it is going to be my joy to speak with Andrew about that today and to get into some of the details of what exactly is out there and why it supports it being the true historical Mount Sinai. Before we get into that, I do want to put out a word of warning to the This Late Hour community. If you've been paying attention at all to what's going on in the world, I think we are headed for some pretty serious times ahead. I know many of us have been just desperate to get back to normal, to see life lighten up and just to get some refreshment and some joy, and I certainly hope you're getting that this summer. But you need to be aware that there is a major food shortage coming. Okay, this is famine levels of food shortage that is coming. And all you got to do is a quick Google search if you've not heard about this. But it's starting to be reported even in the major news outlets. And I mean, we've had, I think last year we had a total of maybe 20 or 21, something like that, fires involving food processing plants or, food distribution centers. This year so far, I think we're at over 100 now. Make of that what you will, but that is a significant problem, especially given the fact we've been losing tens of thousands of chickens and turkeys due to various reasons. There have been cattle, goats, and sheep dropping dead, a bunch of them in Kentucky. And then with the supply chain issues on top of a really strong heat, like the rolling blackouts I mentioned earlier, tough times are ahead. And so if you don't have any extra food or water, please do get some right away. There are all kinds of places you can do that. You can obviously just, get some canned goods. You can, there's places like My Patriot Supply. They're not a sponsor of the show, but that's a place I know I've heard of through different circles where you can get extra food. Please do something because I don't think there's any doubt at this point we are going to be seeing some really tough times coming into the latter part of this year. So please, 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 if you have not gotten any extra food or water, make a point to do that. I would also recommend, if you have the financial stability to do this, to get some kind of a backup generator, even if it's something small that can run, a few appliances to keep things running, because there's going to be more rolling blackouts, I can promise you. Regardless of the reasons of this, there are many things, many speculations. My personal opinion is there's several things afoot. And one of them is that there are globalists at work who are trying to reset the world. And, you have people like Bill Gates buying up, acres and acres of farmland, but not producing anything on it. And then they're making lab-created foods. These people are telling you these things out loud. This is not a conspiracy or a secret. Just go to the World Economic Forum. They're talking about all of these things. Pay attention, folks. We've got to be paying attention. These are very difficult times, and I am also quite convinced we may very well be entering into the time of the 7 seals of Revelation. Now, I know that's a bold statement, but there's lots of reasons I think that. And even just putting aside all of our eschatological theory and sort of, our, view of this or our view of that, just basic observations of what Revelation 6 talks about is almost identical to what we're seeing right now. So I would recommend go to the scriptures yourself. Read the chapter 6 of Revelation, where it talks about the horsemen and the 7 seals of Revelation. And I'm going to be doing an episode on this coming up, to dive into this. And I apologize up front that I have not been able to do, an episode every week. Like many of you have likely been experiencing, life's just been very hard, very demanding. There are spiritual forces at work in this world against the Christian community. There is a lot of death and destruction that's happening, and I've certainly been affected by that. And I just came to the conclusion I could not possibly continue to produce weekly episodes, and decided to take a slight reprieve during the summer, still giving you some content, but just slowing it down because it's been challenging, folks. I'm sure many of you can probably relate to this. I'm worn out, and I'll probably get into that more at some point in the future, hoping to bring David on and have him kind of interview me as a casual conversation and just talk about life and what's going on. One last thing before the interview, I'd like to recommend the Christian author John Eldredge has just come out with a book called Resilient. And it is literally a book about how to survive these days we're in, which he is of the conviction, like so many others in the Christian community and Christian leaders, that we are in the last days. And he gives many of the same reasons I've given, and one of them being that we're nearing the fulfillment of the Great Commission, which, frankly, I see as, the most concrete, biblical explanation of, what we're seeing. I mean, Matthew 24 there in 14, I believe, Jesus this gospel of the kingdom shall go out to every nation, and then the end will come. Seems pretty straightforward. And here we are near the fulfillment of that. And what do we see going on in the world? Global chaos. And chaos that very closely lines up to what we read in Revelation. So please be awake and alert and look at these things. Certainly there's a chance I'm wrong. I really don't think so at this point. I'm not the only one saying these things. Just keep an open hand, an open mind, and be prayerful and alert, friends, as we're in these desperate times. Because I can promise you, as much as I would love to be back to some form of quote-unquote normal. I would. But really our hope needs to be in the return of Jesus at this point. Our hope being put in anything else is not going to satisfy. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't try and get refreshment while we can. I'm going to try and get away for a short vacation, just a weekend with my wife. We're hoping that will come together. But these things are temporary. They're not, where our hope is anchored in. They're but a little refreshment along the way, and a little bit of Sabbath rest, if you will, because it's needed. These are desperate times. And if you're not feeling it yet, believe me, you will. So let me just leave you on this. Stay encouraged. Keep your eyes on the Lord, and please, whatever you do, get extra food and water, not in a panicked way. We believe the Lord is our provider, and He is good and faithful. But He's also given us wisdom, and He's given us the power of observation. And if you just look around at what's happening, to not be getting prepared for all that is coming would be foolishness. So please don't be foolish, be wise, and be prepared, both in body, in heart, mind, and spirit. So with all that being said, let's now get into my discussion with Andrew Jones concerning Mount Sinai and another one of the great treasures of the faith God has brought forward in these last days. So let's move now to the topic of Mount Sinai. I've been excited to speak with you about this for some time. So, for I'd say probably hundreds of years, many have placed Mount Sinai in the South Sinai Peninsula. So I was curious, have you ever been to this proposed site, the traditional site, if you will, and why do you reject the notion that this is the correct location?
Yes, I have been to the traditional Mount Sinai site a number of times doing research and filming, and then I obviously lead tours out there. Um, so I think my last trip there was we went twice in March. We were filming for Tim Mahoney out there, and then I had a tour group. We visited the site. So it's quite an involved topic. To why one site I believe is Mount Sinai over another site. Um, but I just up front I can say that there are not just one Mount Sinai being proposed out there. There's probably a dozen or so of these mountains, and the reason is because the traditional site does not fit the biblical account. So that's why you have other people, scholars and lay people alike, who are looking for a better candidate that would fit the biblical narrative of where Mount Sinai is. Um, this idea that the traditional site is the mountain of Moses, the monastery was built there in the 6th century AD at the base of the mountain. And then all the way back to the 4th century, you do have an Italian pilgrim who came through the area and she wrote about the site being Mount Sinai. But before that, there's not much evidence for this mountain being chosen as the true Mount Sinai. Some people say there are Jewish or Nabatean pilgrimages being made around 100 AD, but it's speculation. They found some inscriptions, but it doesn't prove that this was because these people were making a pilgrimage to Mount Sinai. Um, and so, again, you have other mountains being proposed. Now, when I was there, the first thing you'll notice is there is a valley at the base of this mountain. But the reason why a lot of people reject this site as being Mount Sinai is because it's a very small valley. They're plain. And if you read the biblical account, you have to account for 1 to 2 million Israelites camping there along with their, animals, their flocks and herds. And so that's one big issue about this site. The next thing is where do they get the water from when they were there? In modern times they have wells drilled there, but there's no stream or water that's easily accessible for that many people at the base here. And so I believe that if you were to look elsewhere, I think the biblical account is quite clear that Mount Sinai had to be near or in ancient Midian. And now almost all scholars agree that the Midianites, who were distant relatives of the Israelites, they were descendants of Keturah, who was Abraham's third wife, they inhabited the land just east of the Gulf of Aqaba in the area that's known today as modern Saudi Arabia in the northwest corner. So in Exodus chapter 2, we see where Moses flees the land of Egypt because he killed one of the Egyptians, and he ends up living in Midian and meets Jethro's daughters, marries one of them, and for the next 40 years, he is taking care of Jethro's flocks and herds of sheep. And so during one of those days where he's taking the sheep out to graze, it says in chapter 3 that he takes them to the mountain of God, Mount Sinai, and that's where he sees the burning bush. If you look at a map where Midian is located, you'll see that it is on this eastern side of the Gulf of Aqaba. And then if you look where the traditional Mount Sinai is located, it's on the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba, on the western side, way down in the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. And there's no reason for Moses to make that type of journey with the sheep, where he would go from northwest Saudi Arabia and the land of Midian all the way to the Sinai Peninsula to this traditional Jebel Musa, or Mountain of Moses, that you have the monastery and all these pilgrims going to today. In fact, if you read the old explorers' account, those who came into Saudi Arabia and saw the Bedouins living there a couple hundred years ago, for example, they write that the Bedouins, they do this migration with their sheep, where they go from a lower elevation to a higher elevation based on the season and the temperature. So in the springtime, before it gets hot, they would take their sheep up into the mountains. And then in the wintertime, before it gets too cold up there, they'd bring the sheep back down into the valleys and plains. And this is probably what Moses was doing with Jethro's sheep. He was not doing a long migration from northwest Arabia and the land of Midian all the way to some random mountain in the arid area of the Sinai Peninsula. No, he was just doing this migration from the valleys up into the mountains, and up in the mountains, that's where he came to Mount Sinai and saw the burning bush. And so if you look at this area of northwest Saudi Arabia, it's full of activity. You see archaeological sites showing human occupation going way back. You see evidence of the Midianites there, while the southern Sinai Peninsula is void of a lot of activity. Mainly what you find there is mining activity by the ancient Egyptians, where they had their mines for turquoise and copper. But otherwise, northwest Saudi Arabia had a civilization there. They had the Midianites living. The Bible places Moses there with Jethro's sheep. And again, there's no reason for him to take the sheep all the way down to this traditional Mount Sinai site far away.
So, was the Sinai Peninsula named Sinai because of the biblical story, and that's where people placed Moses, or was it always named Sinai? Do you know?
Yeah, no, the Sinai Peninsula, it's kind of like what came first. So yeah, the reason why they call it the Sinai Peninsula is because of the traditional Mount Sinai site. Um, and it was in the biblical times, this was not called Sinai Peninsula. That's a more recent name given to it.
Oh, do you know what it was called back in biblical
No, I
times?
mean, yeah. So if you look at like the geography, you do have a region that they would call Shur, between Egypt itself and the land of Israel, and going over into Jordan. But not every little desert or every section had a name given to it. Like in modern times, the whole peninsula is called the Sinai Peninsula because of Mount Sinai. But in ancient times, there's not a one name given to the whole area. Now, in the Romans' time, they called some of this Arabia. And so there's sections of Arabia that crossed over into the Sinai Peninsula, while today, Arabia itself is its own peninsula, and it has different countries there like Saudi Arabia and Oman and Yemen. But back then, no, there's not one name given to that area. Now, some people have said that the wilderness of Shur would have included some of the Sinai Peninsula. But again, today we have these nice maps of everything. Back then, we have the scattered text of different areas, but no definite boundaries given. Unlike the Promised Land, when God described to Moses like where the Promised Land would be, He gives very definite boundaries, explaining how the borders would go for the 12 tribes. But for things like the area, this desert wilderness area that we call the Sinai Peninsula, there's not a clear name given for that.
Speaking of the mountain that we would consider to be Mount Sinai over in Arabia, Jabal al-Lawz, it does have an interesting history. What can you tell us about that history, and what do the Saudi locals there have to say about the location?
Yeah, well, so in Northwest Arabia in general, it has been looked at as a possible location for Mount Sinai since the 1800s by some people. We had some British explorers go down there, and I think there was even a Czech explorer, Musil, who went down there in 1910 or so. Anyways, these guys, they had placed Mount Sinai somewhere in the land of Midian. But it was Ron Wyatt who in 1984 and 1985 who actually went to the Jebel al-Lawz mountain range and found a particular peak that had all this interesting things at the base of it, from petroglyphs to an archaeological site that looked like animal corrals that could have been used for the altar of Moses, to even meeting a local Bedouin there who told him, Hina Jebel Musa in Arabic, which means in English, here's the mountain of Moses. And so now this was before there were any YouTube videos or books about the site written. So why did this local go up to Ron and say, Hina Jebel Musa in 1984? And so, there's obviously a tradition that this was Mount Sinai by locals versus what was being promoted as the real Mount Sinai in the land of Egypt, where all the pilgrims go today. So there's a separate tradition that this is the real Mount Sinai here in Saudi Arabia instead of in Egypt.
What more can you tell us about Ron Wyatt's interactions at the location, Jabal al-Lawz?
Well, he started his research in the 1970s, and he first was looking for the Red Sea crossing. He did not believe that the marshy lakes at the tip of the Gulf of Suez, that's on that eastern side of the land of Goshen, the Nile Delta, he didn't believe that that was the correct location. From reading in Josephus and other accounts, he believed that they had to have left Egypt and come to a mountainous area where they would be entrapped on a beach that could hold them. And so he was looking all over, and he came across the Nueva beach area. That's the modern name is Nueva, and that's on the eastern side of the Sinai Peninsula. And he believed that this fits the true Red Sea crossing. And so, if that is the true Red Sea crossing, that would mean that Mount Sinai was not in the Sinai Peninsula, but in northwest Saudi Arabia, because as per the biblical account, the Israelites crossed the Red Sea and then they came to Mount Sinai. And so if the Red Sea crossing happened at Nueva on the Gulf of Aqaba, that would put Mount Sinai in the land of Midian and northwest Saudi Arabia. So he tried many years to enter the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but back then, from the 1970s until most recently, there were no tourist visas allowed, and so he finally decided that he could just risk it with him and his two sons crossing over and sneaking back into Jordan. So that's what they did in 1984. Sadly, though, they were caught when they were trying to return back to Jordan, and they ended up being in prison for over 70 days in Arabia, thanks to a so-called friend who was one of the few people who knew about the trip and had informed the Saudis of it and falsely accused Ron of being an Israeli spy. But he was able to get out. He was in the news because of this episode. And a local Saudi heard about the news story, and the Saudi who lived in the main town in that area called Tabuk, he invited Ron to come back the next year in March 1985, illegally, and this time with a legal visa. And so Ron and one of his new friends who was helping on the Noah's Ark research, Dave Fazold, they both were invited by this Saudi to come visit Jebel Lawz. It was on this trip that they discovered these 18-foot diameter double-walled stone circles at the base that looked like wells. They also investigate thoroughly the altar Moses site with the animal corrals beside it, and they found the cow petroglyphs in front of the mountain carved on these large boulders, and they got gold readings around it. And so all of this happened on the 1985 trip. But when the Saudis offered to Ron to stay and excavate with them the site, Ron declined because he had some meetings in Ankara. He told them about the Noah's Ark project, which he thought at that time was more important to deal with. And so because he had turned down the Saudis, they took all their footage, sadly, and banned them from coming back to Saudi Arabia. And so that was Ron's last trip to Saudi Arabia. He made 2 trips there to the mountain, but sadly didn't come out with any evidence.
Well, in the story of this archaeological find, often overlooked are Jim and Penny Caldwell, who made many trips out to the mountain before it was open to tourists like it is today. What can you tell us about their story?
Yeah, so I've met Jim and Penny. A couple of years ago, we were both on the Michael Rood show, and then they invited me to their house to see some of their artifacts and hear more about their story. And of course, I've seen them on YouTube, and I have some of their videos. Really nice people. So they were Americans who were working in Saudi Arabia in the early 1990s in the oil industry. And it was through a miracle that they heard about Mount Sinai being at Jebel Lawz. They happened to be out of the country because of a visa issue. They had to leave Saudi Arabia for a month and then come back in. Well, during that time, they decided to tour around Egypt. And they were driving. So they drove out of Saudi into Jordan and down into Egypt. They were driving around, and they came to Nuweiba. They were heading back to Saudi Arabia after a month-long trip. And they get to Nuweiba, and they happened to stay at the exact same hotel that Ron was in, and Ron had just left a couple days before. And on Ron's side of the story, he had found out that the hotel owner was interested in helping him document this mountain in Saudi Arabia, because Ron never had any photographs or videos. So this guy claimed that he could enter Saudi on his Hajj visa, because as a Muslim he could go at least once in his lifetime to Mecca. And then after his visit to Mecca, this guy claimed he could swing by Mount Sinai and document this mountain for Ron. And so Ron, he wanted money, of course. And so anyways, Ron and his wife drew a map for this hotel owner and gave him the map, how to get to the mountain. And so after they had left, this guy, Jim and Penny Caldwell and their 2 kids come through, stay at the same hotel. And this hotel owner, when he finds out that they're living in Saudi Arabia and they're touring Egypt, they have video cameras, they know how to use cameras and all that. I think the story goes like he puts them up in like the best room in the hotel and is so excited to see them. And And he keeps talking about a map, and he shows them this map of a mountain that he said this American had just given him to Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. And so he gives them the map so that they could go document it. Now he didn't tell the Caldwells that he was going to get paid for it, but the Caldwells offered to go check this out because they say they visited the traditional site themselves, like everyone else does when you're in Egypt, and they realize that this could not fit the biblical account. It's a tourist site, and so when they hear about this other site, they get interested, because they're living in Saudi Arabia. And so they go and investigate it on their way home. And they worked on the eastern side of Saudi Arabia, on the Persian Gulf side. But on their way home, they swing by the mountain and take video and photographs. And then when they get to their home, they were able to have their sister contact Ron Wyatt. When this was going on, when their sister was trying to contact Ron, that very same day, Ron was back in America, and he was trying to wire, I think it was a couple $1,000s or something, but he was trying to wire more money to the Egyptian hotel owner who claimed he needed some more money to, get to Saudi Arabia.
Of course.
For whatever reason, that day, they did everything correctly according to their story, but the bank called and said, "Hey, the money's not going through. Can you recheck the bank account number for the Egyptian?" And so the international wire was being held up. Well, before the money could go through and anything could have been fixed, obviously God was holding up that money, because as soon as they got off the phone with the bank, they get a phone call from Jim's sister. Now, of course, they don't know who she is. All she said is, "Hey, is this Ron Wyatt? And my brother says he has something for you. He lives in Saudi Arabia." So Ron calls his brother. He explains that, "Hey, we just came back from the mountain you said is Mount Sinai. We have all this video and photographs. We want to give it to you." And so the $2,000 or $3,000 that they were going to wire the Egyptian hotel owner, they used that for Ron's ticket, and they met. I think they went to Dubai, but anyways, Ron met them at a hotel just outside of Saudi Arabia there, and they were able to give Ron, all of this. And then Ron actually recorded a video with them in the hotel room explaining their side of the story and how they, met the hotel owner. They didn't believe that Mount Sinai was in the Sinai Peninsula. So it obviously was God who brought them in. Because they were living there, they were able to go multiple times on their vacation and explore Northwest Arabia in the land of Midian with their, two young kids. They had quite a family adventure. And it was them who found the split rock on the western side of the mountain range.
Yes, if I recall, too, it was rather risky for them to be continually going in and out of there because, there was a time where it wasn't so easy to get in to visit the mountain.
Yes, they did tell Ron one condition was that he could not show their faces. I remember the old newsletters in the 1990s. You'd see like if they were in a video or a photograph, their faces were blurred or their whole body was blurred, so that people wouldn't know who they were. And it was risky to go in there because at that time it was forbidden. The sites were fenced off. A tourist was kept away, or foreigners who lived in the kingdom and worked there were not allowed to come visit. But thankfully, they were able to go there. They climbed the mountain a number of times. They were able to even climb Jebel al-Lawz, which is the highest peak in the range. And then, of course, they explored all over, including the western side. And that's when they discovered the split rock.
Now, you had mentioned Tim Mahoney earlier. Now, he's obviously done several films regarding the historicity of the Exodus, including films on Moses writing the Torah, the Red Sea crossing, and so on. Now, his next film, if I'm not mistaken, is set to release this year, which he's been his whole sort of journey has been wanting to get to this moment, which is about Mount Sinai. So now you had mentioned doing some filming for him. What can you tell us about the film and your involvement?
Yeah. So Tim, I first met him in, I believe it was 2017. Or early 18. We were communicating back and forth at the end of 2016 about the video because he found out we were going in and out of Saudi Arabia on our business visas, and that we had new footage, 4K footage, drone video of all the sites, which was unheard of. And so he licensed almost all of our footage to use in his different films. Now he's been on quite a journey himself to get to this point to present Mount Sinai. And so I believe he'll be doing a two-part series, just like what he did for the Red Sea crossing, because there's so much information. And he'll look at the different proposed Mount Sinai sites, including the one that Ron White discovered, and he'll be using a lot of our footage. I'm not part of the editing team, so I don't know what the percentage is, but I do know he's licensed a bunch of our footage from the different trips over there. He was there, by the way, in 2003 with the Caldwells and Dr. Glenn Fritz and Dr. Leonard Moeller. But sadly, all his footage was confiscated when they left the country. At the airport, the Saudis took all their footage. So he came away empty-handed. So he was happy to hear about our adventures over there, and we were happy to provide our footage to help his project out.
Well, let's kind of narrow in on the mountain itself. There are many attributes of it and the surrounding area that seem to very closely align with the biblical narrative. So what would you consider to be some of the strongest points of evidence for this being the authentic site, the true mountain of God?
Well, we can quickly go over some of the different points that would point to this being Mount Sinai. Number one, again, we're going back to the Red Sea crossing and how Ron first originally started looking at Northwest Arabia. It was because he believed he had found the Red Sea crossing that was on the Gulf of Aqaba. So we believe that if you look at the biblical account, the Gulf of Aqaba, which is where Solomon's ships were based later on, it says in First Kings that his ships were on the Red Sea. So this is his ships were in a well-known area on the tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, probably near modern Aqaba itself, the city itself. And so this places the Gulf of Aqaba as being part of the Red Sea name, and probably the Red Sea that the Israelites crossed based on, that's another topic, but based on the evidence for where the Red Sea crossing is. So that would place Mount Sinai east of the Gulf of Aqaba in Northwest Arabia. So that's the first point, is that it is east of the Red Sea. The second point, I think, is, we kind of mentioned this, but it is near or in Midian. And so when you look at how Moses fled Egypt, ended up with the flocks of Jethro, he didn't take a long journey outside of Midian, way down to the southern Sinai Peninsula, to the traditional site. He was near Jethro's home with these sheep, and he doing just what the Bedouins do today. He took the sheep up into the mountains, and that's when he saw the burning bush in the springtime. And so this places Mount Sinai within the borders or just near the land of Midian for him to do that with the sheep. Another point is that you have church historians, Eusebius and St. Jerome. They, in their writings, associate Mount Sinai with Midian and Arabia Felix. And Arabia Felix is the larger territory of Arabia, covering the Arabian Peninsula, down into Yemen. And so this would fit, obviously, Jebel al-Lawz, which is in northwest Saudi Arabia, versus the Sinai Peninsula, which is not considered part of Arabia Felix. Another point is the historians like Josephus and Philo, they mentioned that the region's tallest peak was Mount Sinai. And here you have Jebel al-Lawz, which is the tallest mountain in northwest Arabia, being associated by locals as being the Mountain of Moses. So that whole mountain range could possibly be described as the Mountain of Moses and the different peaks there. And then if you actually look at the topography for the actual mountain, it fits the biblical account, because the Bible says they had a large enough area for the 600,000 men, not counting women and children, and their flocks and herds, to camp. And when you go there, the topography fits exactly. It's easily accessible through the different valleys to go into this plain that's in the southern and eastern side of this mountain. And the plain is huge. I mean, there are literally probably, depending on how you measure the acreage, it can range from 10,000 acres to more in that area. And then now if you look at the actual chronology of the Exodus account, some people say Mount Sinai is very close to the land of Egypt, a 3-day journey, because they misinterpret Exodus, where Pharaoh and Moses are negotiating about leaving Egypt, and Moses says, let us take a 3-day journey out into the wilderness to worship. So they take that to mean that, that has to be where Mount Sinai is. But if you look at the actual Exodus journey itself, if you read Numbers 33, verse 3, Exodus chapter 19, verse 1 and 2, you realize that it was in the third month that the Israelites arrived at Mount Sinai, and they left, right on Passover, the 15th day of the first month. And so you have this, 45-day to 60-day journey between the first and second, between the first and third month for them to get to Mount Sinai. And so that shows that Mount Sinai could not be very close to the borders. This 2-month journey that they took fits with northwest Saudi Arabia. And then if you look at the New Testament, you see Paul, he talks about Sinai being in Arabia in Galatians chapter 4, verse 25. Now, some people would say, well, during the time of Paul, that Arabia included, parts of the Sinai Peninsula. That can be true, but it definitely included northwest Saudi Arabia. So just one of the pieces of the puzzle. Point number 8 I'd like to make is that local tradition, as we mentioned, has Jebel Musa right there, but it also has different key events happening from the Exodus happening there in northwest Saudi Arabia. You have people, locals will come up to you and tell you as a tourist, hey, did you go see that oasis, that's right around the corner? This is where, the Israelites are at, or where Moses took Jethro's sheep. It's really interesting hearing them. They have the little twist on the story. Like if you go to this wadi called Wadi Tayizim, and this is one of the major oases in Midian. There, they say that God split the mountain. They have a twist on the story. They say that God miraculously opened up the mountain and created a way for the Israelites to get to the oasis through this canyon. And so that's, I don't know if that's their split rock story, but they have the mountain splitting in two, and they believe the Jews came up through that way. And so then you have, of course, the evidence of Jethro's sheep going to Mount Sinai nearby, again, not going all the way to the Sinai Peninsula. And finally, I like to say that if you look at the actual mountain that Ron White investigated, the actual peak in the Jebel Allah's mountain range, the peaks there are called Jebel Makla. That's the modern name that's given to the set of peaks right there. And at the base, you'll find different things that fit the biblical account for what you could find at Mount Sinai. Number one, it talks about that there must be a cave that Elijah flees to. So remember the story of Elijah fleeing Jezebel in 1 Kings chapter 19. It says he went to Horeb and stayed in a cave, and that's where he heard this, the still small voice of God speaking to him. And so this mountain has a cave on the eastern side. It's the only big cave there on that actual mountain. And then in Deuteronomy 9:21 and Exodus 32:20, it talks about a stream, or the availability of water, the stream or brook that came down from the mountain. So that obviously gave water to the Israelites. But in the golden calf incident, Moses grinds up the gold from the cow idol and sprinkles the powder in the water, and it says he made the Israelites drink it. So there must have been enough water coming out of the mountain that gave them that the 1 to 2 million people could drink it. And so you got to find evidence that there was an ancient stream there, or a brook, and you do see that. And finally, the Israelites had to have been able to walk from their encampment to the mountain. Some people, they propose the Mount Sinai site, but then the plain where the Israelites are encamped is far away because the geography doesn't fit the biblical account. So they have to make up stuff. But when you look at this site, the plain that is around the mountain, it goes right to the base of the mountain. And so from their tents, they could walk out and walk to the base, as it says in Exodus chapter 19, and hear the 10 Commandments being given by God. I do have two more points actually here. One is that the mountain has to be a mountain where Moses can climb up and down a few times a day. You find that in Exodus chapter 19, that when they arrive there, Moses immediately goes up to talk to God. He comes down and then goes up again. And so you can't have like a Mount Everest type mountain or a hard climb where you can't go up and down part way on the mountain for Moses to go talk to God. And this fits this mountain. We've done the climb. It is it's not like a walk in the park, but you can definitely climb up and down the mountain a couple times in a day, especially if you're just going like halfway up, where there's this plateau where the possible 70 elders ate with God, where it mentions that in Exodus chapter, I believe, 34. Talks about the 70 elders eating on Mount Sinai with God.
Right.
And then the final point I'd like to make is the cow petroglyphs. You do see that area just at the base, again, it's like a court case. You have all these different pieces of a puzzle, and just happens to be cow petroglyphs there. All this huge area with these boulders, and that fits exactly when you look at the biblical account of the golden calf incident in Exodus 32. It's during that incident that they build this cow goddess or god, and they're in front of Mount Sinai worshiping it as Moses is up on the mountain with Joshua. So all these pieces fit and point to this being the location for where God gave the law.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation today with Andrew Jones regarding the real Mount Sinai. There will be more of our conversation that will release in 2 weeks from now, where we will finish up our discussion talking about some of the other remarkable findings around the mountain, as well as some of the unique features of the mountain itself. I'm going to link his website and some of his videos in the show notes, so please check those out, because really it's hard to sum up just how amazing these locations are if you haven't seen them with your own eyes. So I highly recommend following those links. If you're enjoying these podcasts, please give the show a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, please follow the link in the show description, where for $5 a month, you can get monthly, long-form bonus episodes. If you have questions or comments, please send me an email at thislatehourpodcast@gmail.com, or visit our Twitter at Kasey Knowlton or the Facebook page This Late Hour. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Season 2 of This Late Hour. Join me next week for the follow-up to this interview as we finish out our discussion on the real Mount Sinai. Stay on the alert, dear Christian. Until next time, God bless.
You have been listening to This Late Hour. Your contribution helps pay our fees, improve our equipment, and build better content. It is my hope that your continued support of our show may bring future interviews and exclusives. Our goal is to always be improving our show so that the church may be strengthened in our mission to bring salt and light to this present darkness. May God richly bless you.